Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're going to talk about the search for the meaning of life and the distance one must travel to find it. Today's guest literally walked around the world looking for meaning. Tom Turcich from New Jersey is with us today, and in 2022, he became the 10th person on record to complete this walk. 7 years earlier, after getting his degree and paying off his debts, Tom stepped out his front door to walk through 38 countries, covering 28,000 miles. And joining him on his adventure was his dog, Savannah, the first dog to walk around the world. Since returning from his walk, Tom has been all over the media. He's been featured on Good Morning America, CNN, and The Guardian, just to name a few. He's a speaker and an author, and he has a new book coming out soon called The World Walk, 7 Years in Search of Meaning. This is going to be an epic conversation. I'm someone that loves to talk about purpose and meaning, so I can't wait to share this story and to hear what Tom found on his search for meaning. Tom, welcome to the campfire.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Oh my gosh, man, this is so epic. Just to help me bring listeners up to speed, can you tell us a little bit more about this World Walk?
Of course. The World Walk is something that was born out of my close friend passing when I was 17. She was 16. She died in this freak jet ski accident. And the thing about it, why it was so impactful for me, I think, was because she was just a better person than I was. And like, I had always known that. She was a childhood friend, and she was nicer and kinder and smarter and sort of just better in every way. And when we would hang out, sometimes it drove me crazy how nice she was, and I just couldn't get her to be mean. And then so when she passed away, it was this realization that it was like, oh my gosh, if Anne-Marie could go, who's so clearly better than I am, then so could I. And of course, I had thought about death before, as everyone does. But it wasn't until Anne-Marie passed that I really understood it, that I felt it. And from there, it forced my hand. It forced me to consider how short life is and then what I wanted out of it. And so I reflected on that for a while. And when I thought about what I wanted out of life, after maybe 6 months of reflecting on that, I wanted adventure. I wanted to be forced. I wanted to be forced into adventure because I was timid and introverted. I wanted to travel, and I wanted to understand the world. And so those things I searched for, different ways to travel. And I didn't have any money. And so ultimately I stumbled across this guy, Carl Bushby, who was walking around the world. And that idea just lodged itself into my head as this thing that would fulfill everything that I thought was meaningful in life. And then it was basically from 17 until the day before I turned 26 of saving, planning, going to school, paying off loans, living at home until I was able to begin, and fortunate enough to get a sponsor right before I began that helped a good amount. And then the walk itself was, like you said, a 7-year, 38 country, 28,000 mile walk.
Wow. There's so much to unpack in there. We're going to have to get into that. And I just have so many questions. How many years of planning did you say it took before you actually stepped out the front door?
Well, I first had the idea at 17. I don't think there was actually much real deep planning until the year before I left. I mean, I've read books on hiking, and I did bits of the Appalachian Trail since I grew up, relatively close to it. I had some friends who did it, so I would join them here and there. And so the planning itself wasn't like, this, like I'm taking a class in school where I'm going through and I'm marking all these different, I had places on the map that I wanted to hit, at some point. But really, when it comes down to it, I sort of knew that you can only plan so much, and you sort of just have to begin at some point and make it a trial by fire and figure it out as you go. And that definitely bears itself out ultimately once I started walking. It's like I started in the US from New Jersey and walked down to Mexico. And those first 4 or 5 months, it was a good thing I started in the US because I was just such an idiot and I had so much with me. And even though I was an athlete my whole life, the walking was so different physically
Yeah.
than anything I had done before. And it just was so difficult the first month of like getting my body even to walk 15 miles a day every day. And then beyond that, it was finding a place to camp and finding the right roads to walk that weren't too loud, but also were still direct and were quiet and safe. And there was just so many little things that I needed to figure out. And through that, I ended up adopting Savannah in Texas after 4 months of walking because I realized, man, it'd be nice to have a dog that could listen while I slept. So it's kind of it's just a million of these lessons over and over and over again. In the US, it was very poignant. It was very just day-to-day survival kind of thing. And then as I went further on, it became much more philosophical.
Yeah, I mean, and we're gonna get in. I definitely want to get into some of the stuff with Savannah and how you guys were looking out for each other, because that you were definitely looking out for each other. But again, I just want to come back to like before you left, you talked about this like sort of 6-month period of reflection, and your friend's name was Anne Marie, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So after she passed, like what was that 6 months of reflection like? Like what was going through your mind? Like what kinds of, because this is a conversation about the search for meaning, right? Like this is what the book's all about. So I'm just curious like what that first 6 months was like and how it developed.
Definitely. The first 6 months was this really profound fog, basically, where I sort of just lost the thread of what anything meant and what the point of anything was. And just, I was never really present then because the back of my head was just spinning and trying to find something to grasp onto when, it's like you could go at any moment. And when it's gone, it's gone. And so I was just looking for anything to sort of ground like a new foundation of like a outlook philosophy. And luckily, pretty early into the school year, Emery passed away in the summer, and pretty early in the school year, someone played Dead Poet Society in class, like a couple clips of it.
Yeah.
I'd never seen it before, and that really like hit me at such a prime, vulnerable moment, and where I needed it. I needed to hear that like Carpe Diem, seize the day, and so that provided the like initial way out of that uncertainty and that fog. And so I thought, okay, like we only have a little bit amount of time here, but I can do something with it if you are driven and purposeful. And so from there, then it was really about the reflection. And, I think the values definitely come from both my parents. I mean, my dad is essentially a hippie, and he was a chef in Tahoe right out of high school. He was a chef in high school, then chef in Tahoe out of high school. And then he lived under a tarp in Hawaii for like 4 or 5 years. He bought a little half acre of land on South Point, set up a tarp and a hammock, and spearfish for food, and then worked at a sugarcane plantation for some money. And so I've always had that like desire to be out there from him. And I think he places a lot of value not on making money, but more on existing out in nature and having freedom, really. Freedom of, not having, say like a 9 to 5 or, freedom to do whatever you feel like doing. And then for my mom, she kind of falls in a more different, like demeanor, I guess. And, they're both really, really kind, but my mom is just more serious in a certain way, like, takes things more seriously, I would say. And she was a artist for a long time. She designed children's toys for Tyco and then Mattel. She ran a landscaping company or a landscape design company, freelance company, all sorts of stuff. But she, I think, really drove home the, like, try to understand things, really pay attention, and these things that are happening around you, pay attention to them, and really consider them. And so I sort of had a little bit of both. I had like that lightness of being where I was able to go out and wanted to go out and trusted that humanity was good to be out with.
Mhm.
And then also I had that sort of more like solid drive to look for meaning in things and to take things seriously in a certain way. So I think that's where the values ultimately came from. And then, like I said, the World Walk had just kind of slotted in very nicely into all of them.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, a lot of this is motivated by seize the day, life is short. When you set out, like, was your mindset like, I'm going to search for meaning, or is that like something that sort of evolved over time?
It was much more, I would say, like in the background of things.
Yeah.
It's something that's just always it's always there for me.
Yeah.
It's all like for since Anne Marie passed. I mean, even maybe before then, I think I've just had more of a like a thoughtful, sort of reflective outlook on life. And then Anne Marie really heightened that. So everything I consider every day, I consider what's the meaning of life, what is valuable to do today, what is valuable for other people to do today, how do you build systems that are valuable, and things that are ephemeral, things when ultimately it's all over, what matters. So I think that's always been in the background. And in the beginning, when I started the walk, and it was really about this carpe diem thing, that was much more. So there's like a differentiation when I was 17 and I first got the idea of carpe diem, when I first heard that
Yep.
and latched onto it. It was really about doing everything. And so, I signed up for the swim team because my friend said I should join the swim team. I joined the one act play. And so my days were just like packed, like
Yep.
front to back. And I was just doing everything. But from doing all these things, I realized, oh, you can't do everything. And really, you have to do the things that matter to you. And so that's where the refinement came in. And so it still became about, when I was younger, I had much more of this like insatiable desire, this fire to go achieve these things that I still think are valuable. But the refinement came in from doing everything versus doing the things that matter to you.
Yeah. So, okay. And so you can't do everything. You've got to decide. And so that brings me to the question, like, you could have picked a lot of different adventures. What was it about this particular adventure?
A lot of things. I liked that it was slow. I liked that it would take a long time because I wanted this to be a life. I didn't want this to just be a trip. I didn't want to go. Remember, right before I left, the week before I left, my mom was like bawling her eyes out, and why can't you just walk across the country? And I said, because I want this to be a big adventure. I want this to be life changing. I don't want it to just be, and a walk across America would be an amazing adventure. It was an amazing adventure, and it's fantastic. But I wanted it to be like the critical marker in my life, or one of the defining factors in my life. And so that's what was appealing about it. At the time, I thought it would take 5 years. It took 7 years with COVID, and I fell ill. But yeah, roughly 5 years of actual walking. And so that was appealing to it. I like the walking. It's very accessible. It's slow. This was part of like this value of when I was younger, I was much more timid, much more unassured. And so the walking appealed to me because I wouldn't be able to skip over anything. And if there's a town that someone said, hey, this is a dangerous town, it's like, well, I have to go through it. And so I would sort of be forced out of my ignorance over and over and over again, and forced out of my fear. And so that was appealing to me. I, deeper philosophically from my dad, I believed that people are good, but I needed to like have that point driven home over and over and over again, and just really believe it to my core. And yeah, and then the walking, also walking around the world. I wanted to travel. That was what was, primarily appealing about it. And I said, what better way to get to know a place than by crossing it on foot and seeing,
Yeah.
how people live. I never had any real, the like touristic places never really held any appeal to me. And so I'm much more interested in just the day-to-day life and sort of the blue collar, average. What is El Salvador like in this little town that, is not a tourist destination, or, with the deserts of Peru and northern Peru, what is that like? And so that was much more appealing, and walking fulfilled that.
Yeah. Do you remember, was there like a moment when you kind of like made the decision, I'm doing this?
I would say pretty quickly, as soon as I saw Carl Bushby. It was in the winter of, when would that have been? That would have been 06 or 07, 06 into 07.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was pretty much as soon as I saw it, I was like, it was just like the jigsaw puzzle that fit. And so it's pretty much right away, I knew.
That's amazing. Have you connected with him?
Yeah, I've spoken with him a couple times. He gave me some advice before I started, which was super valuable. He was walking from Mongolia, and he's been walking for years. He's still walking. He was walking from Mongolia back to the UK, and he was doing this section: Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and into, it would have been Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Russia, I guess. And then anyway, it was over in the stands, whatever. And he invited me to join him for that. And I was like, well, I have to do my own walk. So yeah, I have like a pretty nice bond with him, which is great because he was my idol. And I would say one of the more incredible aspects of this, one of the more powerful, meaningful moments of the whole walk. So Carl obviously was the inspiration for what I did. And then I was able to speak with him before I began. And then after a year and a half of walking, I was in the deserts of northern Peru, and in like a pretty difficult mental state. The desert is just so incredibly boring. And I had a fraternity brother in Lima who was waiting to host me, and I was looking forward to that. And instead, I'm just walking through this barren desert for 8 hours a day. And it's just so brutal and unappealing and boring. And the podcast I've listened to is like, I probably listened to already. I ran out. I don't have any more downloads. So I've listened to this music already, and the sky's gray. And then I come to this restaurant, La Balsa. And this is in the book too. This story is one of my favorite little stories in the book. But I come to this restaurant, La Balsa, and the waiter asked if I'm a cyclist. And I said, no, I'm a walker. And he said, oh, we had one other walker. And he points to the wall, and there's these articles of Carl Bushby.
Oh, no way.
And then the owner calls me back, Miguel. He calls me back, and he opens up this book. He has 4 like tomes of books from cyclists and motorcyclists and one other walker in there. And he opens this page. He finds it like right away. And it's this note, like 3-page note from Carl Bushby, basically just very inspirational. And it was, I was in the same place that Carl had walked there. And I was doing the exact same thing, walking through the same desert that he was. And, in a way, like speaking with him brought me to seeing the note written by him. So it was really very beautiful.
I'm getting a little bit of chills here right now, because I'm thinking to myself, like, just, we're on video, I'm looking at you, and you're talking about somebody that inspired you to go do this. And there's somebody that's listening right now that's going to get inspired by you.
Maybe. I mean, my note in the tome isn't as poetic as Carl, so I would look for Carl's instead of mine.
That is so cool. Well, so kind of as we're talking about that, can you give us an overview of the geographical path that you took?
Sure. So it was New Jersey down to Mexico down to Panama City.
Okay.
Flew over the Darien Gap, which is that little brackish jungle that divides North and South America.
Okay. Yep.
Bogota, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, over the Andes into Argentina and to Uruguay, where I had cousins. I dropped Savannah with my cousins in Uruguay, took a boat briefly to Antarctica just to plant my feet on it, came back, got Savannah, flew home, got her paperwork, and then it was Ireland, Scotland. And by then this bacteria infection that I had worsened a lot. So I had to stop my walk for like 6 months. It was like 6 months. I had to stop this walk because of this bacteria infection. I got better. I didn't want to pick up my walk in Scotland because it was cold and rainy and miserable. And so I was like, I was starting in Denmark. So then I walked Denmark down to Spain, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, up Italy, and then along the Mediterranean, across Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. By the time I was over in that part of the world, it was COVID. And so Kazakhstan, Mongolia, which were on my original route, they were closed for the foreseeable future. And then Australia was on my original route, also closed. And so instead of waiting for them to open, also what's difficult about Kazakhstan and Mongolia and Australia is they're kind of time sensitive because of the weather so extreme. And I was like, rather than waiting a year or 2 years, I'm just gonna, I'm out there. I've been out there for 6.5 years already. So it's good enough. I had walked whatever it was 24,000 miles at that point. I was like, that's good enough. I'm gonna fly home. So I walk from Seattle back home to New Jersey.
Man. So you kind of went across the country to start and then kind of back across the other way.
Yeah. It was a really nice way to do it. I'm really glad I did it that way, because in the beginning, I mean, it would be really difficult to start a walk in a place that you don't know. There's just like so many things go wrong, and there's so many kinks you have to work out, and you don't know the culture. So it helped a lot starting there. So then by the time I entered Mexico, it's like, okay, I have the basics down and I can figure out this new culture now without feeling like I'm totally drowning. And then at the end, walking across was really nice because I had just seen the world, and I came back to my own country to walk across and see it with fresh perspective and fresh eyes. And so it's really nice to contrast this place that before maybe I took for granted, or that I wasn't like properly critical of in the right way, to, having seen all these other systems, all these other places. And then also like, I like the American West is as beautiful as anywhere in the world. It is crazy. Like the American West is literally, America is insanely beautiful. Which is really cool to see after walking around the world. It's like, there's not many countries that compare to it.
Yeah. I'm curious, like before you got started, like you made up your mind to do this, but did you experience any like resistance, self-doubt, fear? Like, am I really going to do this? Like, was there anything that kind of held you back?
No, not really. I was very belligerent in that way. I can be very hard-headed in that way. Whereas I think I take my time, like deciding on what I'm going to do. But then once I decide what I'm going to do, it's like, this is for a reason. I've thought this out, and this is what fits into. And I knew the World Walk fit into kind of who I was. I dated this girl, Leanna, in college, and we dated for like 3.5 years. And that was the only point where it was really like my life could go one way or the other. And after she graduated, it could have been with her, or it could have done the walk. But I had been thinking about the walk for so long already that I was already like, it had grown itself into me. And so I knew if I had went with Leanna and started a life in that way, I just probably would have been miserable and resentful and bitter ultimately. Maybe not right away, but years down the line. And so I sort of knew that. And so I went with the walk instead.
Yeah. And you mentioned that Dad kind of lived the survival life for a while. So were your parents supportive of the trip?
My dad always, from the beginning. My mom was supportive, but she was much more scared. And I think she also knew what an idiot I was in the beginning. And fair enough, I was such an idiot. It's amazing to look back on. And a lot of this book that it will be coming out in September, a lot of it, what it really is about is like how traveling changes you and all these lessons that you learned. And I think my mom saw just like, man, you are just such a fool. But my dad, I think, was looking forward to like, oh yeah, go out there and take your lumps and you'll figure it out kind of thing. And, but they were always supportive. They were never going to like prevent me from doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah. So you said that like going in, it almost sounds like you didn't really experience fear and resistance, but you kind of like blame it on the fact that like, oh, I'm an idiot. So like, I'm curious, like how fear might have shown up for you during the 7 years that you were out there.
Well, I mean, there's definitely a lot of fear while walking. And it was constant until probably like the end of the walk, until later on, when I had walked for so long that I knew just people do not care and they're just going about their days. But yeah, in the beginning through Central America, I was on like, I remember walking through these cities, especially where I'm in this new country. I'd never walked abroad before. I'd been abroad like in London and Ireland and UK for just a little trip. I'd been to the Dominican Republic for like a short trip, Canada for a short trip. I'd never done any real walking abroad, and not in any developing country. And so I didn't really have this map in my head on how to process, a new place that is busy in a way I'm not used to.
Yeah.
And so I remember going through a lot of these Central American cities and like feeling like I'm using absolutely 100% of my brain. Like it's like I'm just been hit with a shot of adrenaline, and every single neuron is firing. And until I get out of the city, and I have Savannah with me, and she's just a puppy, and I have her tight on leash, and I'm pushing this baby carriage, and we're navigating the moto taxis and these, maybe broken up streets a little bit, and all these things that I just have no framework to integrate. And then I would get out into the countryside and be like, oh my gosh, I can finally breathe again. And then every time I would get into, another city, it's like I would get so amped up again. And because also, you have to be protective of yourself. Like I'm the only one that's out there protecting me in Savannah. And if I walked now, it would be a very different experience. I would be much more relaxed about it. But in the beginning, it's like, say you're like snowboarding, you just use all your muscles because you don't know which ones you don't need. And so you're very tight, and then you're really sore at the end of the day. That's the same thing as the walking in the beginning. It was very tight. I'm using every muscle, and I'm, trying to be as smart as I can. And I don't know what I can relax with and what I shouldn't relax with. So yeah, there's a lot of fear. I got held up at knife point in Panama City. That was scary. It's a different sort of scary, much less like cerebral scary, and much more, I don't even know if it was scary. It was just like all of a sudden I'm like playing this game with this other guy where I look up and he's got a knife to my neck and he backs me into the shop, and my brain is firing on ways to solve this problem, how to get out of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And ultimately he just kind of walked me back into the shop. Another guy outside grabbed my backpack and he ran off. And amazingly, the cops happened to be there, and like they got the guy with my backpack, like, and had my paperwork in it, Savannah's paperwork in it. It was a miracle they got it. But it was like scary. But also that was, over all these years walking, that was the only incident of real like malice that I experienced.
Yeah. And thank God
it was all good.
the police were right there to protect you. Like, wow, like that could have been
so
a lot
fortunate.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess I'm curious, over 7 years, how has your relationship with fear changed over all that time? Like, how do you experience it now?
The fear is, it's a good question. I'd say it's hard to describe. It's less poignant. I would say it's much more broad based. And I think it's sort of jading in a way, where when, like, after you go through so much, and this is part of just traveling in general, and when you see a lot, but I think the fear is part of it too. Whereas when you have these moments of really poignant intensity and fear over a bunch of years, and then you're slowly able to scrape off, like, okay, you don't need this. Like, you don't need this fear. You don't need this fear, but it happens on a really, really gradual, just one layer at a time sort of thing. But then over enough time, it kind of makes you a little like nonchalant and sort of like, sort of jaded in a way. And it's kind of frustrating, because if I travel now, I'm not afraid of any of these places. Or if I was walking into a new neighborhood, whatever it is, I would be able to pick out what is actually, what I should be worried about, what I should be looking at, kind of thing, and not be overwhelmed by this sense of newness. And so you lose that sort of excitement of like, oh my gosh, this is great to be in this new place. Because part of it is that fear. It's that like, oh, am I doing something wrong? Oh, am I doing this? And instead you can kind of relax. So fear now is much more like, am I making the most of my day? That's the sort of fear.
It actually makes me think of another question, because, in And there's a lot of other podcasts and things, and people need to get the book so they can kind of experience this whole thing. There's so much we're not going to be able to talk about today, but
Mhm.
like, the depth of experience that you had in all of these different countries and cultures and meeting people and places and all of that. I mean, I'm sure that your self-confidence, you came back, you can't not come back with greater self-confidence, but I'm curious how your intuition developed as part of this experience.
Oh, the intuition is enormous. And again, like you said, I mean, that's it. That's like one of the primary threads, like pretty early on in the book, because early on in America, I get myself into a situation with a guy, or I did get myself into a situation with a guy because I didn't trust my intuition and I didn't really have that developed. I also think like as like a white guy growing up in a pretty affluent
Yep.
neighborhood in New Jersey, I didn't have to develop that. If I was a girl, I probably would have had to develop like, oh, trust your gut a
Yeah.
little bit. And so when I was in the US, it was like the first real time when I was walking out there and I'm exposed to all these different people every day. It was like, oh, this is you. That gut is there for a reason, and you have to, listen to it. And so as it went on, you just get much better at like fine tuning that. And also, I think what was advantageous to the walk itself was that I was always passing through. And so if I didn't get a good vibe off of someone, I can just say, I don't care. Like I will meet someone down the road that I will trust 100% as soon as I meet them. And so even if this person is a good person, is a good guy, I can miss out on this
Yeah.
because it's just a little bit off.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's ultimately how it bore itself out.
Yeah. So what I think I heard you say was it more not so much about developing the intuition, but learning to trust it.
Yeah, it's both. It's both.
Yeah.
I mean, developing in the sense of, I mean, definitely learning to trust it. It's definitely just a part of you. But I think you can be overly cautious too, especially when you're out there on your own. And so learning what you can relax again,
Yeah.
what you actually can trust this. This little thing is just maybe like a bias or something that you had before, or just
Yeah.
something that doesn't feel right.
Yeah. I'd love to get into like some highlights of places. But I think I want to frame the question like, where were some places that surprised you?
I would say Colombia was surprising. I mean, I always knew it was beautiful, but it was really incredibly beautiful country. I walked this ecosystem called the Paramo up there, which is it's only in Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. Primarily only in Colombia, though. It's basically high altitude, above the tree line, above the timber line, kind of like rainforest. So it's kind of like a rainforest without the trees. It rains like 300 days out of the year. It's super lush. It's where tapirs are. And what are they? Hooded bears or spotted bear? Spectacled bears, I think is what it is. And so, I mean, Colombia was just incredibly beautiful and diverse and lively and friendly. So that was a great one that surprised me.
So
And then I
let
always,
me stop you for a second. 'Cause I'm thinking about the high altitude, the mountains, and I failed to ask you come leading up to this point, like just for listeners, like what was sleeping like? Where were you sleeping at night generally?
I was camping probably 95% of the time, I would say, wherever. Uh, that's another skill you get really good at for hiding away for 8 hours.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay.
Yeah. And then, yeah, I would say other countries that surprised me. I would say Turkey. And I always go back to Turkey because I think a lot of Americans have bias towards Turkey. I know I definitely did. You see the Star and the Crescent, which is remnant of the Ottoman Empire,
Mhm.
and you think, oh my gosh, this is like an Arab country, and it's going to be very scary, and it's part of the Middle East, or whatever. And it's Turkey was like the nicest country, and I would camp, I would sleep there, and I would sleep great. And it's the landscape's diverse. The food was really good. Walking food is very hearty. And yeah, I mean, it's just a beautiful country, and it really surprised me. And I also, before entering Turkey, I walked Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, North Africa,
Cool.
and they all have the Star and Crescent on the flag too. So I think I also held the bias. I had a police escort all the way across Algeria, had a police escort for the end of Morocco, and then for the length of Tunisia for my own safety. I didn't ask for it. They just were like, "You're getting this police escort."
How did that like come to pass? Like, did they see you and like how did that dynamic happen?
So Morocco, it was only assigned on the last day. And I was like walking, I'm walking towards the border, actually walking towards a Spanish port in North Africa, because Morocco and Nigeria, their borders are shut to each other. And so I have to ferry down. But anyway, it's one of my last days of walking and in Morocco. And I see this guy on the moped pass like 4 or 5 times. I'm like, what is it? Like, what is this about? Like, I've seen this guy a couple of times. And then I walk into the forest to go camp. And I'm only a couple miles from the border. And I had this great campsite, so beautiful up in the forest on like this little hilltop, and it's pines and it's great. And I'm camping there, and then I see like 2 guys coming up the hill. I'm like, oh my God, what do they want? And it turns out the police, and they're like you can't be here. There's like a migrant crisis, and there's people sleeping in these woods that are going to get on the boats, and they're going to try and cross, to Spain. And so it's just not safe for you here. So we're going to take you to, the Algerian border. And then when I got into Algeria, I landed in Mostaganem, which is a little port town. So you have to ferry from Morocco and then back down, from Morocco to Spain, back down. And basically, as soon as I landed, they wouldn't let me leave the little port. They're like, no, you can't leave without an S. And Algeria is a difficult country to get into in the first place. As an American citizen, you need a letter of invitation to get in. And so luckily, my ex-boss was Algerian. His mom still lives in the Sahara. She wrote me a letter of invitation. So really, she's supposed to be taking responsibility for me coming in. And when I told them upon entry what my plans were, they're like, oh no, like that's not going to work. We're happy to have you, but I became the responsibility of every township. So I would when I was walking across Algeria, it was like, I would get a rotation probably 3 times a day, where it was like, this is who I wake up with, this is my escort. And then I get to the edge of one township, and then I'd sign over. They'd get my passport information. I'd have a new escort. I get to another town, sign over. And then in Tunisia, it was the same thing, where they just like, what are you doing walking here? As you shouldn't be walking. It's dangerous, which is not. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg thing. It's like, are they safe because they're providing the escorts, or anyway. And then, in Tunisia, I just had an escort all the way to Tunis, and I was so over it by then. I had already been with an escort for 45 days. So I was losing my mind.
I mean, it just makes me think about like logistics, like how much of that had to be like planned out, and how much of it was just sort of like happening on the fly. Like, I guess I'm curious about like how much freedom you had to just walk the earth, and how much you had to, basically sell what you were doing to authorities.
Oh, a lot of freedom. I mean, I also chose my route. Like, one of the primary considerations of my route was choosing it based on visa friendliness.
Yeah.
And Algeria was one of the only few countries, aside from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, that I needed a visa for, or a visa extension. And even in Algeria, like all the police escorts were very friendly, and they were just more curious about like what I was doing. I thought it was insane, and it is insane. It was an insane thing to do.
I love it. Okay, so we can't miss the conversation about Savannah. So you picked up Savannah in Texas. I think she was 4 months old at the time.
Yeah, maybe less. So somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you kind of bring us up to speed on the decision to get a dog, and then just what it was like to walk around the world with a dog?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, it was very much a decision of, I'm camping in these strange places, and I'm waking up, a few times a night to a twig snapping, and it just couldn't sort of turn off that ancient part of your brain that's on alert. And I wanted to turn that off. And so I adopted Savannah. I showed up in Austin, Texas. My first day there, I go to an adoption shelter, and her sister were just brought in from a kill shelter. And I was like, oh, I don't know, puppy. I don't know. I'll think about it. And as I was leaving, this woman, who apparently she was telling me she visits every day, and she's just like always there. And she's like, they're going to be gone in 10 minutes. So if you don't adopt her now, she's not going to be here the next day. And so she kind of pushed me, suggested that I get her. So I adopted her. And as I was signing her paperwork, her sister was being adopted too. So they were there for like 5 minutes total time. And I got very lucky that I got Savannah. And then walking was great. It was very difficult in the beginning because she was a puppy, obviously. And she wasn't trained and she was terrified of cars and she hated the leash. And so the first month was from Houston down to Reynosa, Mexico. That was really, I had to be very purposeful about shifting my focus from, okay, you're walking 20, 24 miles a day, to the primary focus is training Savannah and the miles are extra. And the first couple of days were really difficult, but then once I put the focus on it, she adapted pretty quickly. And then by the time we got down to Mexico, I used to put her in the back basket of my cart. She was like, she didn't want to be in there anymore. And so she just wanted to be out walking. And so by the time we reached Mexico, she was doing the full 24 miles a day with me. And then Mexico and Guatemala, the Central American countries where those cities were very intense for me, they honed us a lot because we were sort of forced to navigate as a single unit. And then after that, then it really became like, oh man, like after we had went through that and I was able to think for a minute, I remember looking at her and being like, oh man, like she's amazing. Like, I love her. And before it was very much like, I'm just taking care of her. And then at a certain point it became, I love this girl. And she's a great companion and she's just such a beast. I mean, like that's what marveled me so much over and over again. It's like, oh my God, she is just such a monster.
She's such I love, like, in a lot of the videos. I mean, obviously she's in most of the YouTube videos that you can see that you've got out online that are great, but she is just such an awesome dog. I mean, oh man, just kind of walking along. I guess going back to the authority question, I'm curious how, like, having her and crossing over borders, like, did that change? Like, how did that affect things logistically?
It was only really from the US into Europe that required any real like tedious paperwork. It was like a 2-month process. Because you have to get her the rabies titer test and to get the EU passport. But other than that, probably like 50% of the countries when you're crossing on foot from land to land, like they don't even care. They don't even acknowledge her because they're like, there's already strays crossing.
Yeah, true.
That's one more. But then for the other ones, it's usually just health certificate. She has her rabies vax. And I think for Chile, they needed an ivermectin shot. But otherwise, it's pretty much health certificate, rabies. And it's like, she's in.
So the first 7 years of her life is camping and walking the earth, right? Like, what's it been like? And can you tell, like, what has it been like for her to transition back to like Western United States living?
It was very difficult for both of us.
Who was it hard
for? Restless for a while. I remember when I moved out to Seattle after like 4 months at home after finishing, I moved out to Seattle to be with Bonnie, my girlfriend. And like, I didn't know what to do with myself. And I was trying to write this book and I literally just could not sit down. I just did not have, and the attention span, I didn't have that muscle build up. And so Savannah and I would just walk around for like 4 or 5 hours because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And we started to slow down. And I do think it's been good timing because like now she's almost 9 and she was 7 when she finished. And I think by the end of the walk, we were both slowing down. And it was, the miles were sort of wearing on us more and more. And so I think it was a good time for her to retire. And so now I think she's very content. We go for our walk a day. She's on the sofa. She's lounging. She eats some good food. We go for a little walk in the evening. She's on the sofa. She seems very content.
Yeah, it was fun watching you on Good Morning America, and she comes out and she just lays down on the rug. Like, I'm assuming you've got a live audience out there and she's just like totally chilling. That was so awesome. Yeah, super fun. My sense is though, like from a lot of what I've read and heard some of your stories, you guys you had this very cool relationship where like you were really truly looking out for each other. It seemed like when you had low moments, she was there for you. She had low moments, you were there for her. Like that was very cool. I wonder if you could just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different experience traveling with a dog, obviously, and traveling with a different another person. I think it's great because they always do what you want to do, especially if that's all they've been doing your entire life. But she's sort of, Savannah, at least for me, sort of provided like this baseline of companionship where I could never get so low where I'm just totally out there on my own. And when I was talking about when I was in the desert and leading up to Lima, I remember sitting in this abandoned house. There's a bunch of these abandoned houses that would put down there to claim the land, and I sleep in them. And I woke up this one morning, and I'm just like, oh my, I'm just so not into this at all. And I could just call Savannah over and, put my head on her side or whatever. And just like, all right, at least there's some companion, there's like some warmth and there's a heartbeat and there's that. And then also she was just this great example, kind of over and over again of, she was just always excited for what was ahead. She was always, her tail was up. She was always constant, ready to go, rain, sun, shine. She's like, let's go, let's keep moving. And so she was a really great example for me too. And then obviously, I'm buying her food and taking her all these great places. So that's a benefit for her.
You both experienced some illness along the way.
We did. Yeah. She had her nosebleed in Chile and was very close to dying. It was from this tick infection that is pretty common there in South Peru. But it was really scary because we were out in the middle of the desert when her nose started to bleed. And then, I had that bacteria infection. And that's kind of what taught Savannah to cuddle. She never cuddled before. When our first years of walking, I was just like all business. We were all business and never really cuddled. And then when I got sick and I was just at home and just like in agony, I was like, Savannah, you're cuddling. I would just like hold on to her and she would want to wriggle out. And then eventually I kind of broke her and she's like, all right, this isn't so bad.
Yeah, both of those were pretty powerful stories. I encourage people to kind of dig into those a little bit more. I want to ask you though, like when you're on a journey, 7 years, I mean, you're walking solo, you've got Savannah with you, but like when you're walking along and there's just nothing going on and it's just you in your head, like what kind of thoughts go through your mind? What do you think?
Everything's gone through your head. I would say, I think about it in two different ways. The one way I sort of visualized it was like you're picking up these thoughts like they're little orbs or something. Mm-hmm. And you hold them and you look at it and you consider it and then you put it down. And then it probably pops back up 2 weeks later and you look at it in a different light and then you put it down. And then you just do that over and over again for the same thoughts, like 7, 8, 100 times until they just kind of become like, oh, there's nothing there left to look at. And so you do that for, say your relationship with your parents or, the breakup that you had or what your hopes are and why you have those hopes. And you look at it from every one of those considerations. You just look at it from every angle that your brain could possibly come up with until, you have a good sense of what you think the creation of that thought is and where that came from. And then the other way I would sort of form it, this process as this is happening, it's kind of like I thought of it as gardening. And I didn't think of it before, but that's sort of how it ended up feeling, is that when you're walking, you're just kind of on your hands and knees and you're pulling weeds from your head. And you don't really realize you have all these weeds that have built up, but they're there and they're just sort of these unresolved thoughts. And as you're going, you're pulling these weeds. And I remember way down in desert of South Peru, northern Chile, I remember in South Peru, thinking like, I have thought all the thoughts. I have nothing left to think about. And
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so it was amazing in the sense of like the garden was empty. And so I had no more angst. I didn't have anything that I needed to resolve. I didn't have any, like I had come to terms with, the mistakes I made or the decisions I made or, the things that went wrong, the things that went right, the limitations of my life. And so the garden was totally empty. That's and then amazing. On top of that, when I got to the Atacama Desert, the driest desert in the world, has some of the greatest stargazing in the world because it's so dry. I am totally empty and I have the stars just kind of like stomping on my chest night after night with with their vastness. Oh my God. So it was quite a combo. But so I'd say that's kind of what the experience of walking with her all that time is like. Yeah.
Did you talk to Anne Marie while you were out on your walk?
Anne Marie was like, I'm not religious, and I never did the walk for Anne Marie. And I was very clear with like my sponsor Philadelphia sign beforehand. I was like, I'm not doing this for her. I'm just doing it because of her. Yeah. And I talked to her dad the other day. I talked to her dad just the other day. And I talked to Shannon, my other friend who passed away. Anne Marie's best friend passed away just a couple years after Anne Marie did. And I talked to her mom the other day. But no, when I was out there, it was more just like that was like a lesson. And I said at the end of the walk, when I finished, and my sponsor presented this money for their scholarship funds, Shannon and Amory scholarship funds, and I had them there, the parents there. And, I said, in a certain way, I feel very fortunate, and it's terrible. I feel very fortunate that they died, because if they hadn't have passed, it wouldn't have woken me up to life. And so that's always sort of been my relationship with Amory, and the idea of Amory after she passed. And, it's just incredibly valuable for me. And, obviously I would go back and, change the outcome if I was presented with the option. But that's sort of, that's what her passing meant to me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. The book is 7 years in the search of meaning. So I'm
Correct.
curious, what did you find?
I would say a few things. I'll say ultimately, when I'm out there in the Atacama and the stars are crushing me and I have no thoughts, and you're kind of like, what do you build your life on? I'll say like the only measure, it's abstract, but the only measure is happiness, because, anything we're in search of, it's money, security, all that ultimately is to be happy. And so I think the goal in life is to be happy yourself and to make other people happy. And I think the way you do that is you lean into your humanity in a certain way. You get physical activity, you eat well, you sleep well. And then also, you try and create a nice community, be generous, be nice to other people. And then on a higher level, and kind of like most importantly, is like you create good systems. Democracy is better than autocracy. It's the people are more free. You can just feel it when you're in there. Some economic systems are better than other economic systems. They make people wealthier. Some infrastructure is better than infrastructure. American car infrastructure is trash, and people don't realize it, but it contributes a lot to the loneliness epidemic and and a lot of pollution and noise. And it's just, that's something that you can fix, and literally it will make people happier if it's more community pedestrian based. But I think ultimately, that's the meaning of life, is to be happy and make other people happy.
I love that. One of the things we talked about on the phone a couple of weeks ago when we first chatted was that you talked about one of the things this trip did for you is it made you realize how small we are.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah. It's this thing that was driven home to me from just meeting people in all these different cultures and all these different places. And you just end up meeting so many people who are smarter or more driven than you and kinder than you everywhere. And I was always the one passing through their hometown, and I was meeting them as, a woman making smoothies, or a guy selling motor oil to passing trucks, or to, a cook in a little, restaurant in the mountains or something like that. And you just realize that like it really is all about the systems and the geography, and how driven you are and how smart you are. You're still human, and you're still really tiny, and you can't escape that. And some forces are just a lot bigger than you.
That's powerful. Tell us about the book. You got a book coming out.
Yeah, the book is coming out with Skyhorse Publishing. It'll be distributed by Simon & Schuster. And it's coming out in September 17th. It looks like the date. And I'm really excited for it. I put a lot of work into it. There's a lot of good stories. And I think it's a great, beautiful book. I've done a lot of writing my whole life. And it's a story of being an idiot to not being an idiot.
I love that. So, Tom, like I have heard, like everybody that I know that's ever written a book has said it's the hardest thing they've ever done in their life. So I'm just very curious, like what was harder, walking around the world or writing a book?
I would say the walking was harder. I had, I had a bed to sleep in while I was writing, and I had a desk, and I could have my coffee every day.
Yeah.
And Savannah's on the sofa. But no, the writing the writing was a pleasure. I love writing. I love it. It's like one of my favorite things to do, and it's so fun to craft it and tell the story in hopefully an entertaining way.
Yeah.
And I think it does it justice. And like I said, it's about this development of going from someone who is just this very small suburbanite to, a world traveler, and also about how travel changes you, and for good and for ill.
I love it. So can people pre-order, or will they be able to?
Yes, yeah, you can pre-order. I don't know when this is coming out, but the pre-order should be out in maybe early April, something like that.
Awesome.
But yeah, so you should be able to pre-order. You can search The World Walk, 7 Years in Search of Meaning on Amazon. I'll also have a link on my Instagram, The World Walk, or my website, The World Walk. You can pre-order it on there, and it'll be greatly appreciated if you did.
Amazing. Tom, life is short. Seize the day. You had some great role models, and your parents were very supportive of this. Like, what advice do you have for people that are just admiring of what you did, and, sort of feel that call to adventure, that want to go do something? Maybe they don't have something that motivated them quite as much as you did, but what advice do you have for people that feel that call to adventure, but haven't yet stepped into it?
I would say a few things. I would say, first off, like, really consider what you value. I would say really reflect on that, and see what matters to you in life, and don't dismiss those things, but like really reflect on that. But then once you know that, I would say be a bit more reckless with your life, in the sense of, look, it's already over. The game is lost. Like, it's done. And I think what people don't realize either is that they are a lot smarter and a lot more resilient and a lot more adaptable than they think they are. And I think when you throw yourself into things, you are much more capable than you realize. And so I think you should be a little more reckless, because you're tougher than you know.
I mean, that's great advice. Be a little bit more reckless. I love it. Tom, epic story. There's a book. There's gonna be a movie. And I want to know, when Hollywood gets a hold of this thing and makes a movie about you, who's going to be the Hollywood actor that's going to play you in this movie?
I don't know anymore. I don't know any, like, the young actors, but I always got told I look like Justin Timberlake. So Justin
Nice.
Timberlake, they can
He's
like
good.
CGI him.
Yeah, he's good. I love that. That would be
Yeah.
awesome. What's the movie going to be called?
The World Walk. Simple as
World
that.
Walk, starring Justin Timberlake. I love this so much. Tom,
Yeah.
this was such a fun conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Tom's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell, or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Tom, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure.